Dan Hayes, founder of Celignis, welcome to Irish Startup TV.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about Celignis. I see you're in a lab coat, so I'm guessing
this is my passion.
In the science
it's
space.
how I live my whole life, in the lab pretty much. It's based on research I did during my PhD, where we analysed different biomass feedstocks, so different plants and waste materials, and we found the value of these for producing biofuels, such as ethanol, or for producing energy. And we made some advances in the research in the University of Limerick, and now Celignis has commercialised those advances. And we've launched a company then that now offers services in biomass analysis to companies and customers around the world.
So you mentioned that your passion is science. What inspired you to do a startup?
Well, it's basically the research that that I generated during my PhD. It had great value because what we did was we were able to analyse a sample in 5 minutes using infrared light. And the conventional approach takes 2 weeks of analysis. It requires a lot of chemicals, a lot of labour input. It's extremely costly. And so what we've done is reduce the cost, reduce the time, and this has great commercial significance. And I thought there's really a market out there for that, particularly now as the biomass sector is advancing very rapidly globally.
So it sounds like you're very much a businessman and a scientist. How common is it for PhDs to commercialise their research?
It's not as common as it should be. I think a lot of them should focus more on the commercial aspects of what they're doing. As a scientist, you can get lost in the science forever. You can just keep on working and tweaking and perfecting and looking for novel, interesting things. When actually, and this is what I should have done some time ago really, is you should stand back and look at what you've already done and see how you can exploit that to its maximum effect in the market.
So what advice would you have for other scientists?
I would advise them to look at what they're doing and look at the market and how it relates to the current market and whether there is a space for what you're doing within the market. Because I think there's a lot of potential out there for research that's generated, and people aren't really considering that at this stage. A lot of people think about a career in academia, and there's so much more to science than being an academic.
So for a scientist, do you think they should be focusing? Should there be some kind of incentive to help them to focus? Is it something that comes from within, or is it something that comes from external on the side of commercialising the research?
It varies depending on how your research came about in the first place. So what I was involved with was a European project funded by the 7th Framework Programme, and it was coordinated by the University of Limerick. And we had 13 partners in the project from different countries. Latin America was also participating. And it was a €3.7 million project, which I wrote originally for funding. And a big part of that is commercialization. So as the outputs of the project, they're looking for startup companies, patents, that kind of thing. If you're in a different area and your funding mechanism is another approach, maybe it's less well promoted to you, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't look at commercial aspects of what you're doing.
So the funding mechanism then is usually influential on the commercialization and other key inputs?
It's important in terms of whether people look at that in the first place. It's sort of promoting them or sort of forcing them in some instances to look at it, because the funding agencies, for example, the European Union in this case, they want to see ultimately returns from this research, not just in terms of papers, but in terms of companies and products and services that are developed from it.
Where do you see your market?
The market is global. It's actually much more international than it is national at the moment. The biofuels industry in Ireland is not that well developed compared with other countries, particularly the US, where we have most of the large-scale businesses at the moment operating commercial-scale facilities for biofuels.
Is there anything that Ireland can do to help as a government or as a
There's absolutely a lot that Ireland could do. They could. What the America has done to allow this to happen in the first place is they have given tax incentives to companies to actually start commercial operations for advanced biofuels. For example, loan guarantees and other things like that. And that is the main reason why they're so far ahead of what we are at this time.
Some people would argue that biofuels are competing and creating challenges for food crops and creating food shortages.
Yeah, and that's a very valid argument. And there's actually two types of biofuels in the market right now. And there are biofuels called first-generation biofuels, which are made from food and oil crops, and that's where you get a lot of these conflicts. And then the second generation biofuels, which is based on waste materials, low value residuals and crops that do not compete with food. And Celignis, what we're focusing on is that second generation market. And that can advance very significantly without competing food prices and with land either.
Who's responsible for messaging on this topic? Because that's really interesting. I did not know that there was a first generation, a second generation. Is this something that should be raised at a national or an European and global level? Or is it the responsibility of the startups involved?
That's a very good point. There isn't really much education on this issue, and there are certain agencies, but they don't do a very good job of really showing the difference between biofuels, because a lot of people, they do have this image of a biofuel, and there's a picture of a fuel pump to the head of a gorilla, and it's like you're destroying the wildlife, you're destroying the habitat. And it's only when you talk to people about all the different options they see that actually, it can work out.
Who are running those kind of campaigns? Because I have seen some of those kind of crazy images.
It's NGOs generally, Greenpeace type NGOs, but they don't actually have an issue with the second generation. They promote they accept that the second generation has a role to play. It's just that the message does get confused with all these other things going on.
Do you think then could gov agencies help to turn that kind of?
There's some work that governments are doing. For example, you get tax credits if you make a biofuel, but you get double credits if you make a second generation biofuel. So they're trying to encourage the second generation. The issue we've had in the past is that it's more difficult to make a second generation biofuel. A first generation, you use things like sugar beet and sugar cane and wheat, and these are food crops, but they're very easy to then convert. If you're talking about taking your black bin and making ethanol from that, it's a lot more complicated process. But they are getting there now. The cost is still higher, but they're getting there. And ultimately, the rewards will be much greater because there's more of that stuff around that doesn't compete with food.
I'm fascinated that we're in what I believe to be a building full of offices. But you tell me that there isn't just your lab, there are actually two labs here.
There's two labs, yes. The other company is a larger company called Stryker.
So we're going to have a look around the lab later. But just to tell us in the abstract, how does that work? Was a purpose-built facility here already, or did something have to be created?
Yeah, the building, the remit for the building was that it would include 2 laboratories, so for this kind of startup activity.
And as a scientist coming into ostensibly a co-working space for businesses, how helpful was that for you to help your learning?
Oh, it's been tremendously helpful because you're sharing a building with like-minded people that have similar issues to you in terms of business development, starting up, getting funding, and sort of bounce those ideas off other people. It's really beneficial.
I've been saying it all morning. It's so energetic here. The energy is just amazing.
Absolutely, yeah.
What's next on the roadmap? What are the key milestones that you've got coming up?
We're looking to advance our services to other areas within the biomass industry initially, ultimately to other areas of laboratory analysis. We have bought a lot of state-of-the-art analytical equipment. It doesn't just need to be used for biofuels research or analysis. It can be used in other areas too. And we're also looking to expand further the equipment that we have and expand our customer base.
And is there any help, or is there any specific agency or group or company that you'd like to target in terms of either supports or customers?
We've had some support from the Limerick Local Enterprise Office in terms of a priming grant. So they gave 50% towards the cost of some of our equipment purchases. We may go down that route again. There's the possibility of Enterprise Ireland or other agencies. We're also looking at European projects to do research in that would help us to develop the company. In terms of customers, we've identified hundreds of potential customers around the globe, and we're informing them at the moment of what the work we're doing, and they seem interested because we have this infrared approach that no one else is using.
What's your go-to market approach? How are you getting your customers?
At the moment, it's generally by giving presentations at international conferences. I've been to a number over the last few months, and it really helps to get the message out there. Other than that, we're starting to send direct emails, and a lot of people just find us on the internet just by Googling us.
It's a good SEO.
Well, we haven't actually done any
really?
SEO.
Okay.
We just get found.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's super. I'm really excited to see the space that you're exploring. Where do you think this is going to lead to? Where do you see yourself in 10 years' time?
Well, we have started a company based on very strong IP footing, and I think that's a very good foundation to develop the company and ultimately to become the leader in the field in what we're doing. And I envisage that Celignis will be at the foremost company in biomass analysis quite near term, within the next 5 years. And from that stage, then we potentially will roll out other laboratories in other countries to expand our services and to grow and to sort of ride the crest of the wave of the biofuels industry, which is really accelerating at the moment.
Sounds like you're ahead of that curve, so it's really exciting to see. So Dan, thanks so much. It's been really
Thank you very
interesting.
much.
Thank you.